Hi guys. Okay, so this is the first part of the video lecture on sentence basics, and we're going to be talking about the different things that go into a sentence making sense. For most of you, this is where you have the most opportunities. When I was looking at your diagnostic paragraphs, many of you were very strong in composition. Many of you were strong in organization. But when it comes to the nitty gritty, knowing where to put that comma or where to put that period or which subject or which verb goes with the subject, things like that, that was where a lot of you struggled. So we're going to kind of go over this big overview and you'll have a quiz on it. Generally, I'm not going to ask you to look at these lectures twice, but if you're struggling with this, or if this is the first time that this information has been conveyed to you, it might be a good idea to at least go back over the PowerPoint, if not the video lecture. For some of you, this will be old hat. This will be stuff you covered in kindergarten or have covered before. And if you're relatively familiar with the terms and you just struggle with usage, then you don't necessarily need to go back over it a second time. I know that for me and for a lot of people, you could understand the logic behind it. You could understand the grammatical terms and still struggle with applying it in a sentence. That's pretty normal. The opposite also happens. There are some people who get it really naturally, and then you introduce all these grammatical terms, and all of a sudden they're making mistakes that they weren't making before. It's overcorrecting. That can happen too. So if it happens to you, don't feel like you're broken or something like that, because it's really, really common. Anyway, with all of that said, let's start talking about different kinds of sentences and what goes into a sentence. So there are 4 types of sentences, and types of sentences are generally categorized by purpose and by punctuation. So you have a declarative sentence, an imperative sentence, an interrogative sentence, and an exclamatory sentence. The declarative sentence is 90% of the sentences you'll write. It's a statement of fact. It ends in a period. So I'm giving this video lecture. That is a declarative sentence. So here's another example. This is a sentence. And you can see that it ends in a period and it is a statement of fact. An imperative sentence is a little different. An imperative sentence is a command where the subject is normally implied rather than explicitly stated. It can end in either a period or an exclamation point, and you'll find that exclamation points are a different kind of sentence. The difference here is that typically the subject is you, and the word you is not going to be there. So for example, write this sentence. If we had the subject in there, it would be you write this sentence. But because it's a command, we omit the subject, the word you. And that makes it an imperative sentence, imperative sentence, whether it ends in an exclamation point or in a period. An interrogative statement is a fancy term for a question. It normally has an inverted sentence structure, so the verb comes first and it ends in a question mark. It always ends in a question mark. I just put that there to remind you what a question mark is. Can you write this sentence? So if this was a declarative sentence, it would be you can write this sentence. But because it's a question, we switch the verb and the subject and instead make it can you write this sentence. An exclamatory sentence is generally a sentence that ends in an exclamation point. It shows intense emotion, and it is not typically used in academic writing, so you won't use these very much during your college career, but they are helpful to know about. I love writing sentences, and you can see I increased my tone of voice there. So we've talked about some different kinds of sentences and some different kinds of punctuation, and you can see that the arrangement of the words in the sentences and the punctuation used changes the tone of the sentence. I like to look at punctuation. We'll talk about this more in another lecture, but I like to look at it as instructions for how to read what you're reading, what tone of voice you read, what's intended, what's the purpose of it. Punctuation helps us with all of that, as does word order. So now we're going to talk about the nitty-gritty parts of a sentence. And these are some terms you'll have heard me refer to in previous PowerPoints and as I've been talking, but we're going to go into a little bit more detail about them now. So all sentences have 2 parts. A complete subject, which is the subject and any words or phrases that modify it. So the complete subject will include any adjectives, for instance, that modify the subject. And the predicate, which is the verb, and any words or phrases that modify it. And it can be helpful to think of it as two halves of a sentence, even though normally the subject half is much shorter than the predicate half. You have to have a complete subject and a predicate for a sentence to be complete, for a sentence to make sense, for it to be a complete thought. And again, well, it flipped forward, so we'll jump ahead to subjects. So a simple subject is the subject itself with no modifiers. And remember, again, modifiers are things like adjectives. The complete subject is the subject plus any modifiers. So let me see if I put an example. Okay. Example, the white dog was running down the street. The simple subject is dog, just what's doing the running. The complete subject is the white dog. The white dog includes the word the, which indicates which dog, and white, which indicates the color, both of which are adjectives. Subjects normally come at the beginning of the sentence, and it's a lot easier to write your sentences if you put them at the beginning. There are situations where you can put the subject at the end, but it tends to make the writing much more confusing and much clunkier, and in some cases can lead to something called passive voice, which a lot of teachers will take off points for. So it's in your best interest to keep your subjects toward the beginning of the sentence. Subjects are normally left out of imperative sentences, so you take out the trash, we wouldn't say the you part, we would just say take out the trash. And they tend to come after the predicate verb in questions or interrogative sentences. That is the exception to the subjects come at the beginning rule. But even then, they should come right after the verb. So in a declarative sentence, you might say, the boy does his homework. The boy is the subject, does is the verb. In an interrogative or question, you would say, can the boy do his homework? Can is your verb, and then you get your subject, the boy, after that. Predicates are the other half of the sentence. They contain the predicate verb, which is the verb expressing the state of being or the action being done, and anything else needed to complete the thought. They also determine the sentence pattern, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. You can often have adjectives or words that refer to the subject in the predicate, but they go with the verb. They show what the verb is doing. So you're not going to have a situation generally where you have subject, predicate, subject again. It's going to be pretty much cut in half generally, subject, predicate. So here are some sentence patterns, and this is where things kind of get really complicated. I just want you to know these terms right now. I'm not asking you to know all of these things back and forth. I think that going into too much detail about these sorts of things often can lead to confusion and overcorrecting in a lot of students. So, but the sentence patterns, all sentences in English follow certain patterns, and I've included 3 of them. I think there are 7 of them, but the 3 we're looking at right here are subject plus intransitive verb plus a complement. An intransitive verb is a verb that does not show action, and does not have a direct object, so a recipient of an action, because it doesn't show action, right? A subject plus a transitive verb plus a direct object, so you'll have a subject plus something showing action plus the recipient of that action, which is the direct object. And then a subject plus transitive verb plus direct object plus indirect object. So that's the subject plus the action that is being received by the direct object plus who is receiving or doing the recipient of the direct object. We'll go into more detail about those in a second. Linking verbs are verbs that do not describe an action. They normally describe a state of being. They function like an equal sign, and they are followed by a complement. Here, complement is spelled with an E to mean complete, not a statement of admiration, that completes the description. So, for example, Judy is a girl. Judy equals girl. Jennifer was cold. Jennifer equals cold. That's what linking verbs do. Intransitive verbs describe an action, but the action doesn't have anyone or anything receiving. And I was confusing linking and intransitive earlier. I'm sorry. So, example, he died. They cried. Well, he just died. There wasn't anything after that. They cried. They didn't cry at someone or to someone. They were just crying. So there's nothing receiving. There's no direct object. Transitive verbs describe an action where someone or something is acted upon. For example, he delivered the book. She threw the ball. He delivered what? The book. So the book is the direct object. She threw what? The ball. The ball is the direct object. It can be helpful to ask that. Who or what? She threw who or what? The ball, to help define the direct object in transitive verbs. Transitive verbs are verbs that have direct objects. So with a transitive verb, the person or thing being acted upon is called a direct object. Example, she delivered the book. She delivered what? The book. So here's another one. This is from a source online. I just like the way they broke it up. So our cat caught a mouse. The cat did what? They caught. They caught what? A mouse. So mouse is the direct object of the verb caught. Another example. The boss saw her in town. The boss did what? The boss saw. Who did the boss see? Her. Her is the direct object. In town is a prepositional phrase showing where he saw her, but it's not really that important for this right here. Indirect objects occur when the direct object is received by yet another entity. Indirect objects describe for whom or what the action was done, and in a lot of languages they're actually called the who-what case. So example, she delivered the book to him. She did what? She delivered. What did she deliver? The book. And to who or what did she deliver the book? To him. Sometimes the indirect object and the direct object are reversed. She bought him a present. But you can still go through it. She did what? Bought. What did she buy? A present. Who did she buy it for? Him. If you ask those questions, it can help you to locate which word is the direct object and which word is the indirect object. So an indirect object is the recipient of the direct objects. He gave the pirate a chance. Who did the giving? He. What did he do? He gave. What did he give? A chance. And who did he give it to? The pirate. So the verb, find the verb, then ask what. So he gave what? A chance. And then to who? The pirate. Phrases, a phrase is a group of words that lacks a subject, a predicate, or both, because you can have portions of a sentence that do not have everything for a sentence. But they can't be sentences on their own because they don't have everything that's needed, the subject and the predicate. That's called a phrase. A phrase cannot be a sentence on its own. So some examples might be on the shelf, before the storm, the old brown building, walked to the store. So on the shelf, that's just a prepositional phrase. We don't know what's on the shelf, and we don't know who or what is being involved here. Before the storm, again, it's a prepositional phrase. We don't know what happened before the storm. We don't know who or what is being involved. The old brown building, that's just a complete subject. We don't have a verb, so it's a phrase. Walk to the store, we have a predicate, but we don't know who did the walking. So it's not a complete thought, it's a phrase. I'm going to stop here before we get into clauses, but clauses are a phrase with a complete, clauses contain a complete thought. They contain a subject and a verb. And we're going to talk more about those in just a second, but I don't want it to time out. And so I will be right back in a few moments.